Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining this particular webinar from. Thanks for being here. This is a webinar about building influence and getting things done as a product manager. I have seen many different frameworks that define the role of a product manager. All of them converge on one theme that the product manager really functions at the intersection of the customer, the technology, and the business. And this is a great definition. I think these are all very valid definitions. But as a product manager, fundamentally, you are accountable for the success or failure of your product. However, as a product manager, you don't code, you don't go and sell the product to the customers, you don't market it, although you provide some inputs to the marketing department, and you don't provide any customer support after the product has been sold to the customer. So, what exactly is that role? What exactly is that you're doing? And this is a question that I get often. And my answer fundamentally is that everything hinges on execution, and execution happens by influence. And I believe that influence is a key missing piece in terms of the role of the product manager through all the frameworks that I've seen. And perhaps this is the most important capability that a product manager can bring. Before we go into the details, a quick introduction to myself. I'm Satheesh. I'm a product management lead in Google Cloud, focused on storage technologies. Before this, I was in Salesforce and Yahoo. In both the companies, I was working on different data platforms, serving systems, real time and batch processing, analytics platforms, etc. I also worked on productivity suites in Google. And I've also worked on many B2B enterprise products in companies such as Cisco. So that's briefly about myself. Let's talk about what this session is about. Uh, what I've tried to do in this session is to curate my experience in influencing different teams in an organization. Uh, and I believe that these skills and these ideas are really important to be an effective product manager, or a product leader. It's really important to build support in the organization and build influence in your organization with all the key stakeholders that you work with in order to get the things done. That is what this session is about. Again, this is a curation of my learnings, and this session is not about what you probably typically read in different books, although there may be some ideas that overlap. And I have read many of these books too, and some of my own thoughts could have been influenced by these books. I'm pretty sure about that. However, this is not a direct translation of what you will find in a book. This is not about influence, is not about magically changing people's mind. This is something that you build over a period of time by providing value to your stakeholders. And there are no any coercive techniques like, escalations in an organization, or trying to power through your ideas. That's not what this session is about. This is about being a great team player, getting the willing support of the people around you in order to achieve your objectives as a PM. Why should you care as a product manager? I think most fundamentally, your success as a product manager really depends on the support that you can get from others. And building that support is essential to be successful as a product manager. And hence, you have to care about how to build that influence in the organization in order to be successful as a PM. So, without further ado, let's kind of look at some of these thoughts on how to influence your organizations and how to move things forward. The first step in my experience for a product manager to be a successful influencer in the organization is to really focus on the opportunity or the problem at hand. I've seen far too many product managers take an input from a customer and start talking to their teams about, we have to deliver on this. And here is a solution. Let's go implement it. And I believe that's not the right approach for a product manager. As a PM, I think you have to be able to stay focused on the problem and not be married to the solution itself. Your focus should be on the solving the problem. Now, the solution can come from all the different stakeholders. Once you're convinced that there's a problem or an opportunity worth pursuing, collaborating across your teams, whether it is the engineering team or your sales organization, maybe even your legal teams, bringing all those people together, bringing the right stakeholders together, getting those ideas and encouraging them to identify the right problem. To identify the right the solution for the problem, I think is the most important thing to do for a product manager. Identifying the problem is not an easy thing. Uh, here is an illustrative example that I can give you. There is a quote that has been attributed to Henry Ford. Apparently, he said, "If I were to just simply deliver on what the customers asked, I would have delivered faster horses, but not cars." And I think it's a very insightful quote, wherever it came from. The insight there is that it's really important to identify, take a step back, and look at the larger problem. In this case, this problem is one of transportation, moving people from one place to the other in the fastest manner possible, in the most efficient manner possible. That's the problem. And now you can take this problem statement, present it to all your stakeholders, present the opportunity, and encourage them to come up with different solutions. You'll be surprised how often there are better outcomes when you collaborate with all the people around you rather than pushing for a particular solution. Once you nail the problem statement, once it's very clear, the second step is to really understand the value to the key stakeholders. What I've realized in my experience is that there are some people who would be benefited by your proposal, and oftentimes there could be entities or people in the or teams in the organization that will not be benefited, that may object to your ideas. So it's really important to anticipate who may object to these ideas. So take, for example, if you build very complex features into your product in order to serve the customers, uh, it's probably great for the engineering teams to work on really good problems, impactful problems. It's great for customers. However, for a customer support team, this may add certain complexities. And they may want it to be tweaked in certain ways in order to make their life a little bit easier and manageable. So I think it's really important to start thinking about how the people are impacted, not just the product or not just the business, and try to identify those conflicts and resolve those conflicts upfront, involve the stakeholders in the right discussion forums, and resolving those conflicts upfront, I think, is really important in understanding the value and in order to get the buy-in and build influence across your different stakeholders. Once you're clear on the value, the problem statement, it's important to convey that value, to be able to communicate that in a convincing manner. What I found that often helps me is to take your idea or proposal or the problem or opportunity that you're trying to solve, anchor it in some already established belief in the organization or an established practice in the organization. So here's an example. If the current priority of your organization for a particular product, let's say it's a mobile app, is to improve the user engagement, maybe the second order priority is to actually improve monetization from that. So in that case, if I were to deliver a feature, I would figure out how that actually helps the engagement, because that's a common baseline that everybody in the organization believes, and take that take your idea and anchor it against the common belief that's already there in the organization. And it's also important to be as specific as possible. So for instance, I would say, by building this feature X, we can improve the engagement by 20% or increase our monthly active users by 20%, right? So that gets as specific as possible. That shows that you have done the homework as a product manager in trying to understand the value of the capability that you're proposing and put it forward in front of the people. It's also as important as it is to make sure that you're conveying the value in a convincing manner. as specifically as possible. It's also important to avoid the dilution in your message. What I mean by that is, for instance, the feature that you're proposing could increase the engagement by 20%, but it may also have some long-term value. As product manager, you may be tempted to bring all of these benefits together into your narrative. And my recommendation here would be to leave out certain those long-term benefits that you may have and just focus on the current belief in the organization and the current priority in the organization. And just get your narrative fixated on that particular common belief. It's also important to communicate this value as often as you can. And I think that is where you can essentially have to call for the organizational attention. And how you can do that is by making that problem visible, by communicating it often to the right stakeholders. May not always be in large meetings, in your one on ones, in your team meetings, or in your monthly sync ups, whatever is the right platform. Try to make this particular problem or the opportunity visible to the stakeholders. Once you make that visible to the stakeholders, the teams will focus on it. And typically, you will see that whatever the teams focus on, whatever gets invested in terms of the motivation of the people, uh, that gets achieved in companies. And that means, as a product manager, your job is to bring that attention from the various stakeholders on the problem and focus their energies on that. Once you've done that, it's also important to keep this momentum until the objectives are achieved. And that means you may have to create a platform to have this regular communication with your stakeholders. The platform could be in the form of regular meetings, right, with certain periodic cadence. It could be in the form of email updates. It could be in the form of newsletters. Whatever means that you pick that is appropriate for your situation, whatever, it's most important to make sure that the message gets communicated often, and you have a platform through which you can update all the stakeholders on the progress until those objectives are achieved. Now, even by doing all of this, you may not be able to exert your influence in certain areas. Things change in organizations, different people come in, they have different objectives. And when that happens, I think it's really important to not just focus on the short term goal, but have a long term view of your relationships with the people, have a long term view of the product itself, and have a long term view of the people, right? What their objectives are and what motivates different people. And having that long term view always helps in keeping the relationships and making sure that you're able to go back to them with your new ideas. Or it's even important to be open minded and to be vulnerable, to be influenced yourself. Some new fresh blood or some new members may join your team and they may have new ideas. It's important to be receptive to them and important to build that trust and relationships with the different people. And this is where having a long term view, despite potentially having short term setbacks, is really, really important in my experience. Now that we went through some of these things, I also want to talk about some of the common mistakes that product managers do. So mistakes that I have seen. These are the common pitfalls that you should try to avoid and be very aware of, be attentive to, and try to avoid them. So here are some examples. Number one, the pitfall that I've seen PMs do is using leverage. This leverage could be in the form of maybe an escalation to the boss in your organization, or maybe using the request from a particular customer, a large customer, let's say, and try to pressure your teams through your objectives. And doing that creates the resistance and the emotional hurt. Even though it may succeed in the short term, the hurt that it creates in the relationship and among the people will most likely outlast the leverage that you have. And over a period of time, that has a negative effect of reducing the influence or reducing your ability to influence your teams That's one of the things that I would definitely recommend that you avoid. Uh, don't make anything personal, right? People disagree all the time, and disagreements are good. It's important to have different perspectives, and it's really important to not make it personal, not make it a relationship issue. Instead, be very open-minded to have that kind of collaboration and have the attitude to challenge each other in the organization. Don't think of any one particular situation as a win or loss situation. It's never a zero-sum game. There will be disagreements, as we talked about. So it's really important to go through those kind of phases in order to build trust and be able to exert influence on your colleagues. And finally, if you're a leader, if you're a people manager, you can have direct authority over people who are reporting into you. In many cases, there are dotted line reportees or differences in levels in large organizations, even across functions. So it's really important not to use that formal authority. And it's really important to be able to really empathize with everyone in the organization, be able to understand their points of view and understand if there are any objections, understand what those objections are, why those objections are coming, and try to figure out how to work with them, how to work with the people, and how to address those. And I think this is the last pitfall that I have seen that as a product manager, you should avoid at all costs. So we talked about a lot of ideas. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. This is not a complete list. This is a curation of my experience. So let's put everything together and see, what it means. First and foremost, I think as a product manager, you have to realize that your success depends on your ability to influence the organization, the people around you. You need the support of the people around you in order to achieve your objectives. So in order to achieve that influence, number one, focus on the problem statement. You will be surprised that you'll get better solutions than what you envision when you involve all the different stakeholders and collaborate with them. So continue to do that. And if you're not already doing that, make sure that you build that as a habit. Second is understand the value to the different stakeholders, understand the motivations to the different stakeholders, try to overcome those objections as well as try to articulate the value to the people. And make sure that you are resolving any potential conflicts upfront. When you are communicating this value, make sure that you are anchoring on existing beliefs in the organization and have a crisp narrative around your proposal and make sure that you're communicating that as often as possible. Uh, make your proposal visible to all the stakeholders and make sure that you have a platform, you have established a platform to talk about the value and convey your narrative often over and over, reinforce your messages until your objectives are achieved. And finally, know that any kind of influence in an organization is not a short-term game. It's a long-term view. Take this long-term view from the perspective of the people and the relationships. So that would be my thought process on how to influence as a product manager. Now get ready to influence and get things done in your organizations. If you have any thoughts, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to talk about this topic. And let's exchange messages on LinkedIn. And I would love to hear your opinions on this. As I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list. This is based on my own experience, and I would love to hear about your experiences. Thank you.